Sarah J. Maas's series Throne of Glass, ACOTAR, and Crescent City have all become insanely popular since Book Talk got a hold of them, especially around 2020-ish. But with 3 different series, that has a lot of people coming in who are new to her books entirely, confused about which one they should read first. I have answers for you. Now, this might not be the best choice for everyone, but this is how I read Sarah J. Maas's books. I read Throne of Glass, Crown of Midnight, Heir of Fire, The Assassin's Blade, Empire of Storms, Tower of Dawn, and Kingdom of Ash. And then I took a break and I read Catwoman Soul Stealer, which is the secret Sarah J. Maas book. I have a video about that if you want a little more background. Then I read ACOTAR, ACOMAF, ACOWAR, the novella A Court of Frost and Starlight, and then A Court of Silver Flames. And then I finished up with the Crescent City series, so House of Earth and Blood, House of Sky and Breath, and then House of Flame and Shadow, which I just read in January. Do I think I read them in the correct order? Yes. Yes, I do. I read Throne of Glass back in 2013, so it wasn't like ACOTAR was there for me to pick up yet. And I think when it came out, I'll be honest, I didn't really have any interest in reading it because I loved Throne of Glass so much that I thought there's no way any other series could beat this. And so I put it off until I was completely done with all of the Throne of Glass series. And then even then I had such a bad book hangover that I couldn't even fathom going into another series. That's why I read Catwoman Soul Stealer, because I wanted more Sarah, but I couldn't commit. Then I finally sort of sucked it up when Book Talk kept talking about ACOTAR and how amazing it was, and so that's when I read ACOTAR and Crescent City. And while I think this is the right choice for me, there are reasons you might not want to follow that specific flow. I will explain. If you're like me and you like to read series straight through and you don't want to alternate between, Throne of Glass and ACOTAR books and then Crescent City books, you don't want to break the story, you want to stay in one world, I would recommend picking Throne of Glass or ACOTAR and then reading them all the way through. And then when you're done, move to the other series. Whether you read Throne of Glass or ACOTAR first kind of depends on your personal preference. I read Throne of Glass first, and I really do feel like it's Sarah's strongest series. However, she had 4 Throne of Glass books out before the first ACOTAR was even published. That means that Sarah was still sort of finding her voice and style as a writer. And in my opinion, even though Throne of Glass I think is well written, I feel like we see Sarah grow as a writer over time. But because of that, a lot of people find Throne of Glass and Crown of Midnight a little bit slow because I think she is kind of finding her footing. So if you feel like you don't have the patience for that right now, or if you prefer adult books over young adult books, I would go with ACOTAR, especially if you need romance present early on in the story to stick with it, because technically ACOTAR is an adult series and Throne of Glass is technically young adult, but I really do feel like it skews more towards adult towards the end of the series, especially going into Kingdom of Ash. And I personally recommend going through Throne of Glass and ACOTAR before going into Crescent City, just because there are things that overlap a little bit and I think you will miss details and some of the fun Easter eggs hidden if you have not read both of them. That being said, if you can handle reading books in different series at the same time and just alternating back and forth, I always think the best way to read any author's book is in publication order. That means you're not going to risk getting spoiled, and if you're into writing style and stuff like that, you really do get to see the author grow, and that's something that I really enjoy, particularly in longer series. That's how I read the Cassandra Clare books, with a few exceptions because there were so many of them out and there's side stories and stuff like that. But overall, I read them pretty much in publication order and I really enjoyed doing it that way. It's honestly the only way to fully avoid spoilers for other series because all of her Shadowhunter trilogy sort of overlap. So for Sarah J. Maas, she's published so many books. That would be Throne of Glass, Crown of Midnight, The Assassin's Blade, Heir of Fire, A Court of Thorns and Roses, Queen of Shadows, A Court of Mist and Fury, Empire of Storms, A Court of War and Ruin, Tower of Dawn, A Court of Frost and Starlight, Kingdom of Ash, Crescent City 1, House of Earth and Blood, A Court of Silver Flames, and then Crescent City 2 and 3. Can we talk about the fact that she was regularly publishing 2 books a year? And 2018, when she published Catwoman, she published 3 books in 1 year. I told you, King. That is wild to me. So those are sort of your three options. You can read ACOTAR, Throne of Glass, then Crescent City. You can read Throne of Glass, ACOTAR, and Crescent City, or you can read Publication Order. And if you feel like you're a Crescent City person, Crescent City has a lot more technology, it feels a little more modern, then go ahead and read the first one and then go back to the series. But by the time you get to the second book, things are going to be hinting at one another and you just really don't want to be spoiled because the stories are so good. Personal recommendation, if you can handle switching back and forth between series, I think Publication Order is probably your absolute best way to read them. So let's talk about novellas, the tandem read, the bonus chapters, because there's a lot of extra things that Sarah gives us. For the ACOTAR series, there is this small novella bind up that goes between ACOWAR and A Court of Silver Flames. Do you need to read it? No. There's a few details in there that I think are good to know, and if you're the type of person who just really likes to spend time with our characters, I think it's for those people who just want a little bit more, especially if you like Christmas time stories. But anything that happens in that novella, I think all of it got recapped at some point in Silver Flames. I really don't think all that much happens. Like, there isn't a ton of plot to it. You can just tell, like, Sarah was definitely having fun watching her characters interact and sharing that with us, which I think was fun to read, but I think I went into it expecting it to be book 4, which is why it felt a little bit of a letdown to me. If that doesn't sound like your cup of tea though, like, you can definitely read a summary or watch a recap video. I have one, I will link it in the description. Then you can definitely skip this one. All right, when should you read Assassin's Blade? I feel like this is one of the bigger SJM controversy, when should you read it things that's going around right now. This is a bind up of novellas, and a good portion of them happen before the events of Throne of Glass. That's why some people say you should read this book as the first book in the series. I personally don't love the idea of reading it first. I know some people who chose to do it and they felt like that was the right choice. And yes, you would be reading in chronological order, timeline-wise. And if you read a little bit into the series and then backtrack, you are sort of spoiled for stuff, but not in a way that makes this not worth it. And I feel like reading some of the series, then coming back to this, it's really helpful to have an understanding of who Selena is before reading this book. And yes, you do need to read it. I think a lot of people think it's not mandatory reading, and I guess technically you could get through the series without it, but I think this is super important to read at some point before Queen of Shadows, because once you get to Queen of Shadows, stuff in this is just, it keeps popping up. The thing is that Throne of Glass and Crown of Midnight, they pair together really well. In, like, theoretically, I think they might have been able to be one book. I think it was a good choice to sort of split it because there is a natural pause. But overall, they feel like the same story before you go into Heir of Fire, which just wildly expands the entire series. And I believe that's because Throne of Glass was originally supposed to be a trilogy, and then Sarah decided to expand the world. So in book 3, you gotta hold on because you're going. There's so much that needs to be set up in book 3. So I think that you could read Assassin's Blade between Crown of Midnight and Heir of Fire, and technically that's Sarah J. Maas's recommendation. And that makes sense because that is their publication order. I ended up reading it after Heir of Fire because I was one of those people putting it off. I was like, oh, novella bind up, like how important is it really? And glad I ended up reading it after Heir of Fire. It did sort of feel like a natural time, at least for me, to go back and visit Selena's past. And we meet some characters in Heir of Fire that make the overall story feel a little more hopeful and exciting. And I think if I had gone into Assassin's Blade without that, I would have been at a lower point, because Assassin's Blade, without any spoilers, it shows a lot of really hard things that Selena went through, and you don't always feel amazing reading that book. And so knowing some of the facts from Heir of Fire, it sort of gave me a little bit of a beacon in some of the darker parts of Assassin's Blade. Empire Storm and Tower of Dawn, they happen at the same time in the chronological timeline. And so a lot of people have made reading guides where you'll go and you'll read a couple chapters of Tower of Dawn, and then you'll switch back and forth like that to sort of stick along the timeline. If you're one of those people who really likes to read things in chronological order and like you're gonna read Assassin's Blade first and you want the story straight through, the tandem read might be for you. Personally, that sounds horrible. I would have hated that. To me, I think they're separate books for a reason. If Sarah just wanted us to read them chronologically, she would have alternated POVs. I think you should read Empire of Storms and then Tower of Dawn. That was their publication order, and if you're gonna read one at a time, I think it would be really hard to go into Tower of Dawn without knowing what happened in Empire of Storms, because your brain in the story is still in Empire of Storms. That's the plot line you're gonna want to focus on. I would go with that one first. Personally, I didn't even want to read Tower of Dawn. I didn't think it was mandatory reading because our main character's not really in it. I just thought it was like a side story. This is mandatory reading. I know it's about Kale, and I didn't like Kale, but I liked him after this book. If you don't want to read it, just give it a shot. I promise it gets so good. And if you don't read it, you're going to miss out on the punch of a lot of stuff that happens in Kingdom of Ash. All right, bonus chapters. I think this is similar to A Court of Frost and Starlight. It's great if you want to see more from our characters, if you want to spend more time with them, you're having a seriously bad book hangover, but it's not really mandatory to the story. Also, different books have different bonus chapters. So with A House of Flame and Shadow, there were 5 editions from 5 different sellers, and each of those had a different bonus chapter. If you wanted to own all 5 bonus chapters, theoretically, you would need to own 5 books of the same story, unless you visit Reddit, as I did. But having them split up like that, I feel like is a really big signal that they're not 100% needed to understand the story, because I feel like if you really needed to read all 5 bonus chapters and you would be spoiled for stuff, you would be missing stuff without it, I think Sarah would have fought to have them all in one place, because I think it's just unrealistic to expect everyone to track down all 5 bonus chapters and either buy it or, go online. Like, I just think if they were mandatory, they would all be together. They're more of like a nice to have thing. But those are my thoughts. And I'm just a person on the internet. You could read House of Flame and Shadow first. I don't recommend it, but I can't stop you. But if you were looking for a guide, I hope this helped you out, gave you some things to consider. And no matter what order you choose to read, I really think all of these series are so good that it's worth the read no matter how you go into it. I would love to hear from you. If you have already read all of Sarah's books, let me know what order you read them in, and if you think that was the right order, or what your recommended order is when you have people coming in who are reading it for the first time and they want to know. If you haven't read her books, did I convince you? Let me know in the comments which one you plan to read first. I always get so jealous of people going into Sarah's books for the first time. Like, you are gonna have such a fun adventure. And I'm a little jealous. Please like this video if you liked it. Click subscribe if you want to talk about more book stuff. My name's Caitlin. Thanks for watching. Bye.